The novel revolves around Samantha Winters, a woman on the run from a menacing figure named Gerard, who she fears has pursued her to the small town of Aztec. Initially, Samantha believes her anxiety is unfounded, but the persistent sensation of being watched suggests otherwise. Seeking refuge in a local diner, she's acutely aware of her dwindling finances yet still leaves a generous tip, reflecting her understanding of the struggles of service work. After leaving the diner, Samantha's unease persists, prompting her to enter a clothing store as a potential means to evade whoever might be tailing her. Despite the store clerk's less than warm reception, Samantha remains vigilant, scanning the street outside through the shop window amidst browsing through garments. The narrative takes a significant turn when it introduces a romantic subplot involving Samantha and three men, Justin, Roan and Chet, who are revealed to be werewolves belonging to the Freeze Pack. The story delves into the intense and passionate relationship Samantha shares with her werewolf mates, depicting scenes of explicit intimacy and deep emotional connection. Amidst the romance, the novel also explores themes of danger and resilience. Samantha learns that the Aztec Club, where she works, has a troubled past involving arson and kidnapping. This revelation highlights that the women destined to be mates of the Freeze Pack men often attract trouble, with Samantha finding solace in the fact that she isn't alone in this predicament, although she's uneasy about endangering others. Further chapters reveal Samantha's recovery from an attack, and her mate's protective nature. Jonah, the alpha, demands a full account of the incident once Samantha is lucid, showcasing the pack's concern and the gravity of the situation. Samantha's desire for safety and love intertwines with the challenges she faces, including a near-death experience, and the knowledge that someone from her past still poses a threat. The novel concludes on a hopeful note with Samantha surrounded by her loving mates, who vow to protect her from harm. The final scenes emphasize the healing power of love, and the promise of a secure future within the pack, even as the threat of Gerard looms in the background, unresolved. In summary, this novel is a blend of suspense, romance, and paranormal elements, chronicling Samantha's journey from a woman fleeing danger to finding love and acceptance within a werewolf community, all while confronting the dark forces that continue to pursue her. Chapter 1. Samantha Winters felt eyes on her, and the hair on her nape stood on end. Where's that coming from? She didn't dare glance around the small-town diner, afraid that she would turn on her stool and come face-to-face with Gerard. He can't have followed me. The last place she thought she'd seen him was at the New Mexico border. Filling her rusted-out bomb with gas that she could barely afford, she'd thought she saw the shifty bastard on the other side of the pumps. Even as she told herself she was just being paranoid, she'd ripped out of that station so fast she was surprised she hadn't melted the asphalt behind her. Not until arriving at the outskirts of Aztec did she let her foot up off the gas. Now she wasn't so sure she'd just been succumbing to paranoia. The sensation at the back of her neck wasn't going away. She finished her coffee and left money on the counter for the bill. She hesitated for a moment as she sifted through her last remaining dollars, but in the end she left the tip the waitress deserved. Having waited tables herself, she knew how much tips mattered, and at this point it didn't matter how much Samantha tried to hoard her pennies. She was going to be out of cash soon. As she left the diner, her eyes took note of the shops lining the main street of Aztec, but she was also aware of the people around her as they went about their business. She still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She had thought she was safe here, so far away from her hometown of Sebring, Florida. She decided to step into a store. If anyone was following her, maybe she could give them the slip. Glancing up, she saw a doorway and beyond it racks of clothes. She darted inside without a second thought. The sales clerk gave her a slightly cool welcome accompanied by a dubious once-over. Samantha wasn't wearing anything half as fancy as these clothes, but she gave the clerk a smile and went to the rack near the front windows. While her hands sifted through the clothes on the rack, her eyes watched the pavement through the window. Beyond the well-dressed mannequin, pedestrians passed in both directions, but she saw no one suspicious. Being on the road for so long was getting to her. Between her weariness and the financial strain of being on the run, she wondered if maybe she ought to hang out in Aztec for a little while. All she really needed was to find a job. Samantha warmed to the idea. Maybe she could even work here. Her gaze went to the jacket she'd been pretending to examine. I can see myself wearing something like this. Then she flipped over the price tag. She let go of the jacket like it had burned her. Hazarding a glance over her shoulder, she found the sales clerk watching her through narrowed eyes. Samantha felt her cheeks burn. Squeaking a thank you to the clerk, she went back outside. The prickling on her neck had relented inside the store, but now it was back. Feeling more unnerved than ever, she stood on the sidewalk and tried to figure out who was giving her that feeling. Kids walking home from school? No. Mailman? No. Samantha looked directly to her right and froze. Gorgeous guy standing by a tree? About 20 feet down the sidewalk, a very tall man wearing a black t-shirt was fiddling with his cell. At least he was now. Samantha was almost certain that a moment before she'd set her eyes on him, he'd been watching her. She put her back to him and made for her motel, hurrying down the street to the room she had booked a couple of hours ago. She knew she wouldn't feel safe again until she was behind a closed, locked door. But the feeling she was getting now wasn't exactly fear. She wanted to look over her shoulder and see the tall guy again. The idea that he might be following her should have been scary, but she found it strangely comforting. Girl, you're losing your mind. The last thing she needed right now was anyone following her, tall and good-looking or not. Back in her room, she crept to the curtain-covered window and peered out into the parking lot of the motel but couldn't see anything. Sighing, she moved over to the bed and sat down. That moment of feeling watched and protected had fled. Now she just felt watched and scared again. God, what am I going to do now? I have only a few dollars left and am down to the last quarter tank of gas. Sam spied the local paper on the coffee table in the room and picked it up. She flicked the pages open until she found the employment section and started to peruse the classifieds. There wasn't much in the paper she was capable of doing, since she only had supermarket, waitressing and bartending experience. But she was determined to find something before the day was out. She had to. Otherwise she would have to take to living in her car and going hungry. A giggle of hysteria rose in her chest and burst out from between her lips. Sliding sideways on the small sofa she was seated on, she curled into a ball and clutched her knees to her chest until the laughter gave way to great, racking sobs. Her life was a mess, she was a mess, and she had no one to turn to for help. His wolf howled and then shivered beneath his skin, then butted against him, trying to get out. The beast wanted total reign over him as he scented the woman he had been waiting for since he knew what a mate was. He inhaled deeply as a tantalizing scent assailed his nostrils when he stepped outside of the Aztec Club after finishing his shift behind the bar. Never had Roan smelled such an intoxicating aroma, and he grinned as the image of a cartoon character floating in the air as he followed a scent trail flashed through his mind. He wanted to wrap himself in that perfume, roll around and drench his wolf body in it until his wolf was satisfied, but of course he couldn't. For one, he didn't want anyone beside his pack members knowing he was a werewolf, and two, he would definitely cause a stir amongst the human citizens of Aztec, New Mexico, if he stripped down to his bare skin and ended up arrested for indecent exposure in the middle of town. Drawing the aroma into his nose and filling his lungs with the essence, he turned to follow that amazing fragrance. He couldn't even begin to describe how that scent made him feel. It was fresh and sweet, making his cock stand at attention. His heartbeat picked up and his breathing escalated. Goosebumps rose up on his skin, the hair on his body standing up alertly, but not because of any danger. It was like his whole body was being drawn toward the perfume, like a magnet, and he had no desire to resist that call. The sweet bouquet led Roan to the small diner, and he entered with heartfelt purpose. He scanned the interior, calling on his inner beast to find his quarry but being careful not to reveal his animal. The last thing he wanted was for someone to notice his eyes changing from their usual brown color to a glowing gold. He found her sitting at the long counter drinking coffee and was blown away at first sight. She was absolutely gorgeous. With long brown hair and smooth white creamy skin, she was petite and small in stature, but she had curves in all the right places. He could only see a partial profile, but from what he could see of her lips, oh man, he had to stop himself from going up to her and tasting those full, lush, and naturally red Cupid bows. Stalking toward the empty stool beside her, he took a seat, and even though he wanted to turn and stare at her, to take in her features until he had every minute detail burned into his brain, he restrained himself, not wanting to scare her off with his intensity. Roan ordered a coffee and was only vaguely aware of the elderly waitress leaving to get his drink. Keeping his head facing straight ahead, he surreptitiously watched her out of the corner of his eye from beneath slightly lowered lashes. He wanted to know everything about her, where she came from, what her name was what her favorite color was if she was staying in Aztec, and if so, for how long. He wanted to breathe her in and keep her by his side until he was permanently etched into her heart, body, and soul. He wanted to pick her up and take her back to the den and then bury himself in that small, lush body until neither of them could walk. But he knew if he told her what he was feeling, she would likely run screaming from him with horror or look at him like he was delusional. Humans sometimes had a hard time with the idea of being mated to 3 men, let alone werewolves. He followed after a few minutes and kept her in his sights. Hiding behind a thick tree trunk, he studied her intently. She ducked into a store, then reappeared moments later. She hesitated on the sidewalk. His mate looked so upset. Had that sales clerk given her shit? So Roan would give her a piece of his mind. His mate turned toward him, and his enhanced sight caught the shimmer of tears in her eyes. He wanted to rush over to her and enfold her in his arms, wanted to offer her comfort. He wanted to know what made her so sad and what had caused the pain in her eyes. Roan followed her until she entered a room in the new Aztec motel. Sighing with resignation, he turned on his heel and hurried back toward his car, which he had left outside of the Aztec club. He needed to see his brothers and let them know he had found their mate. Roan got into his car and, instead of driving toward the pack house, eased out of the parking lot and headed toward the Aztec motel. The thought of leaving his mate when she might disappear was too much to bear. He parked his car and sat watching her door. Heaving another sigh, he knew he couldn't delay any longer. He was going to need his brother's help if they were going to have a chance with their mate. Chet, Justin, I have found our mate, Roan said through their personal mind link. She's holed up in the Aztec motel, where I'm currently sitting in my car. How do you know for sure she's our mate? Asked Chet. You wouldn't ask me that if you'd smelled her scent or had to control your beast from trying to claim her. What does she look like? Justin inquired. Oh man, she's beautiful. She has long brown hair, the sweetest brown eyes, and curves just begging to be caressed. From what I could tell, her ass is a ripe peach just begging to have a bite taken out of it, and even though she's not very tall, boy does she had a set of legs on her. Do you know where she's from? Chet asked. No, I didn't get a chance to talk to her. I found her in the diner and she left a minute after I arrived. I followed her to the motel. Shit, Roan, what if she's only stopped for the night? How the hell are we going to get her to stay? Justin queried. I don't know. I haven't worked that out yet. It's a pity she didn't take a room at the club. We could have watched her from there. You can't stay in the motel parking lot all night. You'll cause suspicion, Chet speculated. What the hell do you want me to do? I'm not leaving. She could check out at any time. We'll figure that out if it happens, Justin replied. Once we get there, we can form a plan. Good. So how long before you get here? We're already on our way. We should be there in 20 minutes. Did you inform the alphas? And don't forget to bring me some clothes. Already taken care of. Roan figured his brothers must have begun preparations as soon as he told them about their mate. The 3 of them had all been restless since the alphas of Freeze Pack had found their mate. And then one after the other, the betas, the second layer of pack hierarchy, had found their mates as well. As he watched their cousins, the Domain brothers, and both sets of Freeze brothers find their mates, Roan had felt divided between happiness and envy. It was so hard watching his family claim the one true female meant for them, since he and his brothers were still waiting for their own mate. The yearning to have the love of his life in his arms had been there for a long time, but as each of his family members found their own woman, it had made him realize how lonely he truly was. One night he had heard his pack leaders and beta cousins talking about the way their werewolf powers had been enhanced once they had claimed their mates. Seemed their already augmented hearing, sight, strength, and speed increased even further, but he couldn't fathom such a thing. Being werewolves, he and the members of the pack already had phenomenal strength compared to the average human male. Roan and his brothers would experience the same increase in strength if they persuaded their woman to mate with them, but there was a long way to go before he could imagine that happening. The powers were a bonus, but they weren't the real reason Roan longed to go into her room and pull her into his arms, to wrap her in his love and protection. He and his brothers wanted to have a woman in their lives to love and nurture. to fill the empty places in their hearts only a mate ever could. Roan sat up straight in his seat when the door to his woman's room opened. There she was. God, she was beautiful. The setting sun shone down on her head. As she walked toward the reception office of the motel, and he could see red and blonde strands of hair highlighted throughout her tresses as the ends caressed the top of her ass. What he wouldn't give to be able to run his fingers through that mane and see if it was as soft as it looked. Groaning with arousal, imagining that hair sweeping across his thighs and cock, he adjusted his hard dick. He wanted to wrap those strands around his wrist and hold her steady as he fucked her mouth, taking a deep breath to control his raging libido and his persistent wolf, who was once again pushing at him to make a claim. He shifted in his seat and got out of his truck. As soon as he stepped into the office, her scent wrapped around him once more, taking his breath away. He sidled up to her and listened as she conversed with the elderly woman behind the counter. She was asking about employment. Joy filled his heart because if she found work, that meant she was going to be staying in Aztec at least for a while. No, I'm sorry. I don't have any positions available right now, the elderly woman replied. Well, thanks anyway, his mate said. Roan couldn't let such an opportunity pass him by, so when she began to turn to head out, he quickly sidestepped, and she bumped right into him. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you standing there, she apologized. Fuck. Her voice had a low, husky cadence which immediately put his mind in the gutter. He wondered if it would go lower when she was aroused or on the verge of climax. And her eyes were what he thought would be called bedroom eyes. Her lids looked like they were half closed, the dark, sooty lashes giving her a sensual appeal, and her irises were a deep, soulful brown. No problem, he rasped. I couldn't help overhearing that you're looking for work. I have a job you may be interested in. Oh, my name is Roan Domain, and I work at the Aztec Club down the street. We have need for a wait person if you're interested. Room and board are provided in the package, he stated, extending his hand to her. She took his proffered hand, and he saw those sexy eyelids flicker up. Her eyes seemed to light from within, and her pupils dilated slightly, tugging her hand away from him as if he'd burned her. She licked her lips nervously, drawing his gaze to her mouth, and took a quick step back. Oh yeah, she'd felt it too. That little zing of electricity which had passed between them. His nostrils flared as his wolf picked up her scent of arousal and began butting at him from inside. Samantha Winters, but call me Sam, she stated in a deep, husky voice which grabbed hold of his cock, making it pulse against his zipper. Why don't we go on over to the club and get some dinner? We can talk about the particulars and you can ask what you want to know, Roan suggested. Sure. Change of plans, guys. I've just made contact and offered her a job at the club. She's coming to have dinner there with me to talk over the particulars, Roan explained. We're nearly there. We were just about to pass by, Chet replied. We'll grab our usual table. She's nervous, so take it easy on her, Justin, Roan commanded. I'm not stupid, Roan. I'm not going to boss her around. Yeah, well, that might be easier said than done, bro. Once she's near, your wolf is gonna want to take over. And since you're the eldest and the most dominant, I just want you to be prepared. Just shut up and get over here, Jason demanded with a growl. See, that's what I'm talking about. You need to back off tonight. Yeah. Roan stepped up closer to Sam and took her elbow in his hand. She had to tilt her head back to look up at him, and he could see the apprehension in her gaze when her eyes connected with his. Come on, Samantha. Let's go get some food, Roan said and guided her out to his truck. Opening the passenger door, he noticed her eyeing the high step. Not giving her a chance to protest, he clasped her waist and lifted her onto the seat. Thanks, she said in a higher-pitched voice. You're welcome. Roan closed the door and walked around to the truck, inhaling as much fresh air as he could so he could try and suppress his raging arousal. It was going to be pure torture in the confined space of his vehicle. The last thing he wanted was for his eyes to begin glowing in her vicinity. Chapter 2. Sam wondered how she had ended up sitting between two tall, muscular, hunky men with another sitting across from her. Roan had led her to a booth in the back of the club and introduced her to his brothers Justin and Chet. Even though she was wary of them, she felt drawn to these men as well. When she had shaken both their hands, the zap of electricity she had felt with their brother had coursed through her body. Again, First Justin and then Chet had perused her body from head to toe, causing cream to leak from her pussy and her clit to throb. She had tried to withdraw from them and kept her voice cool, hoping they didn't realize how they all affected her. But she was having a hard time hiding her arousal, and the sexual tension was so thick she could have cut it with a knife. No matter how sexy the three of them were, though she doubted she would even have given Roan the time of day if she hadn't been so desperate for a job. She was over men and the way they treated women, and she'd had enough of the opposite sex to last her a lifetime. But these three men kept drawing her eyes back to them again and again. Shit, Roan was so damn hot, with his shoulder-length black hair and brown eyes. As she was short, his height of 6'2" made her feel small and petite. She had never thought about how she felt next to tall men until now when she was surrounded by them. Roan had wide shoulders which tapered down to a slim, taut abdomen and hips with long lithe legs, and looked strong and muscular in a rangy athletic type of way. His brother, Chet, looked to be the youngest of the three but also the tallest, at about 6'6". He moved to the end of his seat and stood staring at her. She slid her gaze away, in case he thought she was ogling him to where. She wrung her fingers and glanced upward at him through her lashes. His tight t-shirt accentuated the rippling muscles beneath the cotton as he shifted, and he looked at her expectantly. His hair was a dark brown, almost the color of chocolate, and his eyes were hazel, a mix of green with brown and gold flecks. "What would you like to drink, darlin'?" Chet asked. Goosebumps rose on her skin as the deep cadence of his voice washed over her, and she squirmed in her seat when her pussy clenched and leaked juices onto her panties. "God, Sam, what the hell? You've only just met these men and your body's ripening from the sound of their voices. Get a grip, girl." Water, please," she answered, hearing the breathless quality of her voice, and lowered her eyes again quickly. Shifting her eyes to Justin, her breath caught in her throat. His irises were a deep stormy gray, and he was looking at her as if he wanted to devour her whole. His hair was dark enough to be almost black, but she could see traces of brown throughout. His shoulders were very wide, his biceps looked to be larger than she would be able to encompass with two hands, and he was packed full of rippling muscles. She didn't think he was as tall as Chet or shorter than Roan in height, but until she saw him standing she wouldn't be sure. Quickly diverting her eyes to her lap again, she tried to get her wayward mind and body to return from what she considered freakish reactions to three strangers. The three Domain brothers seemed to be a fair bit older than her 23 years, and she felt as if she was out of her element considering they appeared to be in their early to mid-30s. "What do you want to eat, sweetness?" Roan whispered in her ear, and she sucked in a gasp when his hot, moist breath caressed her flesh. Pardon?" she asked. Even though she had heard and understood the question, she wanted a little more time to get her body back under control, and she hadn't even looked at the menu, which sat in the middle of the table. "And what's with all the endearments? I don't even know these men." "Food, Sam. What do you want?" "A burger," she blurted, and felt heat rise in her cheeks. "God, Sam, could you be any gawkier?" "A girl after my own heart," Justin stated from her other side. He must have shifted closer to her, because she could feel the heat emanating from his body, and his masculine scent assailed her nostrils. The smell of his sweat was so nice, mixed in with spicy soap and clean mail. It was so enticing she couldn't help taking a deep breath for another whiff. "How do you want your burger, sweetness?" "Pardon?" Sam asked, looking up at Roan. "Do you want a cheeseburger or one with the works, Sam?" "With the works, please," she replied just as Chet returned to their table. Gratefully reaching for the glass of water, she downed half the contents in one go and only looked up when she realized silence reigned around her immediate vicinity. "Do you want another of those, darlin'?" Chet asked. "No, thank you. I'm fine." Roan touched her arm to draw her attention but held a finger up when the waitress came to take their order. Once the waitress was gone again, he turned back to her. "We could use another waitress here, sweetness. Do you think you'd be interested?" "Yes. I've worked as a checkout chick, bartender, and waitress." "Well, you sound like you're exactly what we need," Justin said. "You realize that room and meals are included in the package?" "That seems to be very generous," Sam said hesitantly. "We like to take care of our employees, honey. Our cousins own this establishment and like to know that the people they employ are going to hang around for a while." Justin stated firmly. Sam could tell he wanted an affirmation that she would hang around too, but she couldn't make a promise she might break. So she lowered her eyes and didn't confirm or deny his unspoken question. Where are you from, Sam? Chet asked, breaking into the uncomfortable silence. Florida. What brings you to this neck of the woods? Justin asked. I just felt like a change, she answered, shifting uncomfortably. Are you married, sweetness? Roan asked, and when she looked up she saw he was looking at her bare left ring finger. Divorced, she replied abruptly, not wanting to get into the particulars of her farcical marriage. If she opened her mouth to explain, she was scared the whole sordid story would come spilling out, and the last thing she needed was to see their pity at her predicament. So when can you start, honey? Justin asked. What? When can you start working at the club? He asked again. Oh, tomorrow if that's what you want. Are you sure you don't have to check with the owners before you hire me? No, darling, we are running the club right now. Our cousins have more important things to oversee at the moment. If they didn't trust us, we wouldn't have complete control, Chet explained. And yes, you can start tomorrow. Does 3 o'clock suit you? Yes, that's fine. What do you all want me to do? You can help out wherever you're needed, Roan answered. Do you have any experience cooking, sweetheart? Yes, I often helped cook in the last hotel I worked for. I love to cook. I had planned on being a chef, but things didn't work out, Sam explained, and then cursed at her runaway mouth. She hadn't meant to reveal anything about herself, but there was nothing she could do since the horse had already bolted. Why didn't you, honey? Asked Justin. Sam began scrabbling in her mind for something to say without going into too much detail, and then she sighed with relief when the waitress brought their order. Shelley, this here is Samantha Winters. Chet introduced her to the waitress. She'll be starting work here tomorrow. Hi, Samantha, welcome aboard, Shelley said and gave her a wink. Nice to meet you. She then looked at the massive burger on the plate in front of her. Her stomach was all tied up in knots. She was so nervous, and she didn't know if she could stomach any food right now, but she didn't want to appear rude after the trouble the 3 Domain brothers had gone to by hiring her and ordering her dinner. She cut the hamburger in 4 and picked up a quarter. Taking a bite, she looked up as she chewed. They were all staring at her again. Chet caught her eye, and the corner of his mouth tilted up in a sexy half grin, but she hastily looked away again. By the time the 3 men had finished eating, Sam had only done justice to quarter of the burger but couldn't have taken another bite. Are you all right, Sam? Roan asked. Yes, she answered and looked up at him. He had a frown on his face, and he was looking at her as if he were worried about her. Don't be stupid, Samantha. The man doesn't even know you, so why would he worry for you? He's just being polite because you didn't eat much. If you're finished, why don't we help you pack up your stuff and move you in? Upstairs? Chet inquired. Oh, I had thought I could move in tomorrow morning sometime. I've already paid for tonight's accommodation at the motel. Okay. What time do you want to move tomorrow, honey? Justin queried. We'll be there to give you a hand. You don't need to do that. I only have a couple of bags. She turned to look at him. Staring into his eyes, she thought she saw his irises flash from gray to gold and back again. The hair on her nape stood on end, but when she blinked, his eyes looked normal and all expression was wiped from his face. Turning back to Chet when he spoke, she caught him glaring at Justin just before he pinned her with his gaze. Would you like another drink, darlin'? Yes, please. How long have you lived in Aztec? She asked, directing her question to Roan. We were born here, sweetness. Our family has been in this town for generations. Wow, it must be nice to have such sturdy roots. What about you, honey? Where in Florida did you grow up? Justin asked, taking the bottle of beer Chet handed him when he returned to the table. I spent my childhood in Sebring. Do you have any brothers or sisters, darlin'? Chet inquired. No. And your parents, do they still live in Sebring? Asked Justin. No, my parents are no longer living. They died 6 months before I finished high school, she replied emotionlessly. Shit, that must have been hard on you, Sam, Roan said gently. I survived. I finished school and was able to continue paying the mortgage with the small life insurance policy my dad had. Then I sold up, intending to use the remaining proceeds from the sale to go to culinary school. But you didn't go, did you, honey? Justin took hold of her hand. What happened? Sam opened her mouth to answer automatically, and then quickly closed it again. She didn't want them to know how gullible she had been, but the urge to blurt out what a mess her life was in was nearly tangible. How long had it been since she had someone to lean on? Chapter 3. Justin knew she was leaving out a huge amount of information. He wanted to ask her so many questions to find out why she looked so sad, lonely, and scared. But he didn't want to frighten her off. She hadn't stopped fidgeting and squirming since she sat down, and she'd hardly touched her food. In his opinion, she could definitely do with another few pounds on her slim frame, but he didn't have the right to make sure she was eating properly, at least not yet. Roan had been right. Samantha Winters was their mate, and he intended to do anything he could to keep her in Aztec and woo her into their beds. She was such a timid little thing, but man was she a looker. He had already figured out she had a submissive nature and couldn't wait to test her mettle. Everyone had a limit, and he wondered how far he could push before she reached hers. Nearly every time she met his gaze, her eyes skittered away and looked down. She had avoided looking at his brothers too much too, but underlying all that nervous energy he could smell her arousal. He'd caught her giving them all the once over and hoped she liked what she saw, because he definitely did. The scent emanating from her pussy was any indication, she was definitely attracted to them. Could you let me out, please? She asked Roan. You haven't finished your drink yet, sweetness. He indicated her untouched soda. I need the ladies' room, she replied haughtily. And just like that, some of her true nature shone through. Justin smiled over her head at Roan and then Chet. He could see their eyes twinkling with amusement too, and knew that they liked that she had some backbone at least. When she was on her way to the bathroom, Roan slid back into the booth. Well, what did I tell you? She's our mate, isn't she? Yes, she's ours, Justin growled possessively. Fuck, Justin. You're going to have to watch it. Your eyes began to change. And Sam noticed, Chet said. Yeah, I know. Sorry, but fuck, she's such a submissive little thing. She brings the beast out in me. I don't think she's as passive as she makes out. She told you just a minute ago, Chet said, pointing at Roan. Yeah. He sighed wistfully. Who would have thought such a husky voice could sound so cool? So what do you think her story is? I don't know, but she's scared of something. Do you think she's running from her ex? Chet queried. Could be, but we won't know for sure until she opens up with us. She's not going to do that yet. She's so fucking skittish she can't sit still, Chet explained. Yeah, and every time she moves my wolf gets a whiff of that sweet pussy cream, Roan groaned. I can't wait to get between those slender thighs. I could feast on that sweet little cunt for hours, Chet rasped. She's taking too long, Justin interrupted. She should have been back by now. Fuck. You don't think she's made a run for it, do you? Chet rose to his feet. No, Justin sniffed the air. She's in the back corridor and she's scared. Move. Justin, Roan, and Chet hurried through the tables and people until they were at the entrance to the dimly lit corridor which led to the restrooms. A rumbling growl started low in Justin's chest, and the hair on his nape stood on end. Their mate was currently trying to push through two human males as they caged her against the wall. Justin didn't even realize that he'd moved until his hand wrapped around the nape of one man as he heard Samantha asking to be released. The lady asked you to let her go. Didn't your mama teach you any manners? Hey, who the fuck do you think you are? Back off, man. Justin turned his back towards Sam so she wouldn't see his face and let the bastard see the full force of his angry wolf. He bared his teeth and let his eyes change from their normal gray to golden fury. What the fuck? Hey, sorry man, I didn't know she was with you. The idiot whined. It doesn't matter whether she is or not. You shouldn't be treating her that way. Women are to be looked after, not accosted or abused. Justin spat out. Leave and don't come back. If I catch you or your friend anywhere near this town again, there'll be trouble. Sure, whatever you say. We were just leaving. Justin watched the two men until he saw them leave the club and then turned back to face Samantha. She was currently sandwiched between Roan and Chet, her head hiding against Chet's chest. Are you okay, honey? Did they hurt you? Justin asked. No, came her muffled reply, and then she lifted her head. Her cheeks were pale, her pupils were dilated, and he could see the slight tremors racking her small frame. They didn't hurt me. They were just out to start trouble. Thanks for coming to my rescue. Justin was about to pull her out of his brother's arms and into his own, but she buried her face again and he heard her sniffle. Shit. She was crying. Those two fuckers had really scared her. He frowned over her reaction. He could understand her being nervous and angry, but Samantha was terrified. What the hell is going on? I don't know, bro, but she's shaking like a leaf, Chet replied. Shoo, it's okay, sweetness. They're gone now. We won't let anyone hurt you, Roan said as he caressed her back. Do you think her husband abused her? Chet asked. I don't know, but I intend to find out, Justin answered firmly. Sam, come. Here, honey. She peeked up at him, and when he saw tears sparkling on her lashes and the wet trail down her cheeks, he wanted to track those two pricks and rip out their throats. Taking a deep breath to control his anger, which he knew was an overreaction to her fear, he pushed those thoughts aside. Moving slowly so as not to startle her, he took hold of her hand and pulled her into his side. Wrapping an arm around her shoulders, he led her to the doorway halfway down the hall, opened the door, and stepped into the office. Roan and Chet followed and closed the door behind them. He walked her over to the couch, sat down, and pulled her onto his thighs. Expecting her to make a fuss and push away from him, he was surprised when she turned her head and hid her face between his pecs. God, she felt so right on his lap and in his arms. I can understand you being afraid of strange men coming onto you, honey, but why were you so scared? What's going on, Sam? I don't want to talk about it, she replied, her forehead still nestled into his chest. Sweetness, we only want to help you. Are you in trouble, Sam? Roan asked as he sat down beside them. I don't know. What do you mean by that, darlin'? Chet inquired from his position, leaning against the desk across the room. She didn't answer this time, just gave a shrug of her shoulders. Justin had enough of her trying to hide from them, so he placed an arm beneath her knees and a hand between her shoulder blades to keep her steady and shifted her around on his lap. When he had her back cradled in the crook of his arm, he took her chin between his index finger and thumb, turning her head so her eyes met his. Answer the question, Sam. Are you or are you not in trouble? He demanded to. No. I was, but I ran. She tried to pull her chin from his hand, letting her go. He placed his hand around her throat, holding her lightly, caressing her soft, silky skin with his thumb. Hearing her breath hitch in her chest, he let go. Immediately. The last thing he wanted was to have her scared of him. Tell me, Justin commanded. I don't want to talk about it right now, Sam stated with a haughty tilt to her chin. Justin's wolf pushed against him, wanting to make her submit to him because of her little action of aggression and defiance. He inhaled through his nose and knew instantly that was a mistake. Her sweet scent wrapped around him, making his wolf howl inside, begging him to claim her. She smelled of oranges, peaches, and feminine arousal. He closed his eyes both to regain dominance over his inner beast and to hide his irises in case they began to glow gold. He pushed back hard against his wolf. When he felt it was once again safe, he opened his eyes to look down at her. All right, I'll leave it be for now, but don't think you can hide from us too long, honey. I will get the answers I want. Samantha pushed off his lap, and he reluctantly let her go. Standing before them, her head lowered, she wrung her hands together, but when she lifted her head there was fire buried in the depths of her eyes. I really should be going now. Thank you for the job and dinner, she said, edging toward the door. I'll drive you back, sweetheart. Roan stood and moved toward her. Oh, you don't have to do that. It's not too far to walk, and I don't want to be a bother. Do you honestly think we are going to let you walk back to the motel alone? In the dark after what just happened? You aren't a bother, honey. Let Roan drive you back, Justin stated firmly. Expressions flittered across her face. First there was nervousness, anger, then fear, and finally relieved resignation. Okay, thank you again. It was nice meeting you all, she said quietly and opened the door. She left without a backward glance, Roan following behind her. Do you want me to get Chris, Blake, and James to run a check on her? Chet asked. Justin pondered whether his aforementioned cousins, who happened to be the heads of security of the Freeze Pack, should look into Samantha's background. Even though the thought was tempting, he really wanted to give her the chance to open up to them on her own. No, not yet. Let's give her some time to get used to us first. Yes, she's submissive to a point and running scared from something, but she also trusts us. Give her a little more time and I think she'll trust us even more. Why do you think she trusts us? Because she didn't try to leave even though she was nervous, and she didn't try to push us away when we protected her. She snuggled into Roan as if she had known him for years, even when she was scared of those two idiots. And she didn't protest when I pulled her onto my lap. You may be right. We'll ease her into wanting to be around us, and then, God willing, she'll want to mate with us when the time is right. Fuck. How do you think she's going to react when she finds out we're werewolves? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Justin smiled wryly as he stared at the door she'd left through only minutes earlier. He watched from behind the dark windows of his car and felt anger building up inside him. He snarled aloud. The man leading her to the motel room was holding her elbow as if he had the right to be possessive. He recalled everything her weasel of a husband had told him about her. How she loved to be tied down and helpless during sex. The way she loved to be smacked around and got off when beaten during copulation turned him on more than anyone else ever had. Just the thought of having her was enough to arouse him. He was about to pull his dick out from the material confines of his jeans when he saw the brute with her look toward him. He didn't think he could be seen, but he felt uneasy when those eyes didn't waver away from his. Deciding caution was the better part of valor, he started his car and pulled out of the parking lot, looking back in the rearview mirror. Just before he was out of view, his gaze connected with the man's once more. He was going to have to be very careful to avoid that man. He didn't like the feeling of being prey one little bit. Chapter 4. Roan felt his hackles rise and heard a growl of anger coming from a car hidden in the shadows of the parking lot. He turned toward the sound and, using his wolf vision, pinned the man in the vehicle with his gaze. The bastard looked to be watching Samantha, and Roan could feel the fury rolling off him in waves. When the car started and peeled out of the parking lot, Roan knew his assumption had been correct. Whoever that man was, he had been watching his mate and had thought he was safe until Roan heard and spotted him. His mate had someone trailing her. The desire to know she was safe and protected clawed at his insides with possessiveness. There was no way he was leaving her alone when she could be in danger. You need to pack a bag, sweetness. It's not safe for you here. I want you to come back to our family home where we can protect you, Roan stated firmly. What? What are you talking about? The car that just left was occupied by a man, and he was watching you. Think it would be better for you to stay with us. I don't think that's such a good idea. Besides, how the hell could you see who was in the car? The windows were tinted, and it's as black as sin out tonight. I have excellent vision, Sam. Be a good girl and pack your bags. Whoever you're running from has found you. Roan saw her shiver and knew he had finally succeeded in making her think about her own safety. I could just move to the club, she asked more than stated, but he could hear the fear in her voice and wanted to protect her more than anything else right now. Well, you could, but there is no one else currently renting the rooms. Stairs. I wouldn't feel right leaving you there by yourself. Anyone could break in and hurt you if that was their intention. We have our own suite of rooms in the house we share with our family, and you could bunk down in the spare room as long as you like. I'm really not sure I should. Sweetheart, I'm not sure you understand the situation. Whoever that was watching you wasn't just out to enjoy the night air. Now you have 3 choices. 1, you can pack your things and come back home with us. 2, I can stay here with you, or 3, I can summon Justin, and believe me, he won't give you a choice. So what's it to be, Sam? She was nibbling on her lip and looking anywhere but at him. He could see the uncertainty in her face and the frown between her eyes. A need to reach out, to pull her into his arms and soothe that lip with his tongue before he plundered her mouth, grabbed him by the balls, clenching his teeth and fisting. His hands didn't help one little bit. Are you sure you have a spare room? And who do you all live with? What if they don't want me in your house? First off, you will be welcomed by everyone. We have a large family, Sam. Lots of cousins and such. Since we have all worked together to combine an entrepreneurial empire, we decided that living in the same house was the best option. Some of my cousins are into the security business. Others look after properties we've acquired, and others, such as ourselves, work wherever we're needed. You'll be able to meet all of my relatives but also the CEOs of our operation, Jonah, Mikhail and Brock Fries, along with their wife Michelle. Their wife? What do you mean by that? Sam asked as she finally unlocked and pushed open the door to her room. Just what I said, sweetheart. Their wife. Our family is a little unconventional, Roan explained, and the phrase understatement of the century drifted through his thoughts. The men in our family tend to fall in love with the same woman, and if she is agreeable, she ends up in a relationship with them. What? She asked incredulously. Shit. Sorry, Sam, I don't mean that all the men in the family share the same woman. What I meant was that brothers seem to love the same woman. So far my Ella cousins Jonah, Mikhail and Brock Fries are married to Michelle. Greg, Jake and Devin Domain are married to Kira, and Chris, Blake and James Fries are married to Talia. But how is that even possible? Last I heard, polygamy was against the law. Sam exclaimed. It is, sweetheart. The woman marries the eldest male but is committed to the other men in her heart, Roan explained. Oh boy, when you said your family was a little unconventional, I had no idea. How much? You still don't, sweetheart. God, I wish I could tell you everything right now. And then take you to bed and claim you. I want to see those sweet eyes glazed over with passion and to taste those sinful lips of yours. You have no idea how much I want to bury my cock into that sweet pussy and bite you so you will be by my side for the rest of your life. Roan cleared his throat and pushed his thoughts aside. Thinking like that only seemed to rile his wolf, and that was the last thing he needed right now. You still haven't told me what you've decided, Sam. What's it going to be? Sweetheart, do I stay here with you or at the club, or are you going to come home with us? Once again Sam nibbled on her lip. Expressions flittered across her face as she tried to decide. Her face was very expressive, and he watched as first nervous apprehension skated over her features, then outright fear, and finally acquiescence. He held his breath, hardly daring to hope her decision was going to be what he wanted, but no matter what she said, he wasn't about to leave her side. I'll take you up on the offer of your spare room, but if we get there and I find you've lied to me, I will make you bring me back here straight away, she declared, gazing at him coolly. I promise I have not lied to you once, Sam. I wouldn't do that. Okay, but I'm sure you can understand my caution. I hardly know you. We've only just met. I know, sweetness, and if I do anything at all that you don't like, you just come right out and tell me. Okay? He asked. That goes for Justin and Chet, too. All right, she answered on a sigh. Do you need any help packing your things? No thanks anyway, but I prefer to do it myself. She began to do just that. Justin, Chet, there's been another change of plans, Roan said through his and his brother's intimate mind link. Sam is going to come and stay in our spare room. I'll explain later, but I don't want her to be alone. From now on, one of us will be with her at all times. I think whoever she's running from has found her. Fuck. I'm glad you were able to convince her to come home with us where she'll be safe. I'll contact Jonah and let him know we are bringing our human mate home so the others will know not to let her see their wolf tendencies. Justin replied. Shit, how is she going to react to the unconventionality of the relationships between our alphas and the betas and their mates? Chet asked with agitation. You don't have to worry on that score. I've already told her the men of our family like to share their women. How did she take that? Justin inquired. Much better than I expected. Even though she may trust us, she is still wary. So make sure you don't do anything to upset her. I don't think it would take much to send her running, Roan cautioned. Okay, I'll try to curb my dominant tendencies, but you and I both know it won't be long before we try to get her into our beds, Justin said firmly. Yeah, I know. Just try and give her a few days to get to know us. Okay. Yeah, I'll try, but I'm not promising. She wants us just as much as we want her. If she makes the first move, I'm not holding back. Sam finished packing and they walked back out to the parking lot into her car. Roan was appalled at the condition of Sam's rusted bomb of a car but didn't feel it was right for him to comment just yet. He made sure to get a good look at the tires. Seeing they had plenty of tread, he sighed over the fact she had at least one thing safe on her car, but there was no way he could tell the condition of the brakes, and he wasn't about to let her drive that piece of junk without checking. Let's go and pick up Chet. He wanted to drive back with me, then we can come and get your car, sweetheart. he suggested in a light tone, not wanting her to know he had an ulterior motive. That's not necessary. I'll follow you to the club. You'll save on gas that way. Her last statement and the condition of her car made him realize she was broke. Oh honey, you are in financial trouble as well, aren't you? Taking a deep breath, he knew he was going to have to relent. Thank goodness it was less than a mile to the club. He didn't want to have to explain his protectiveness toward her by clarifying he didn't want her driving that piece of shit. Okay, but when we get Chet, I want you to let him drive your car. These roads aren't familiar to you and I don't want you getting lost. Are you ready, Sam? Yes, lead the way, she replied. They both got into their cars and headed out of the parking lot. Roan sighed with relief when he pulled up into a parking space outside the club. He'd already contacted his brothers through their link to tell them he wanted Chet driving her car. Once she was in a relationship with them, the first thing he planned to do was buy her a brand new vehicle. He and his brothers were quite well off and didn't have to think before they spent any money. It came in handy, having a productive family that had great business acumen. They had invested money over the years and those investments had proved very lucrative. Chet was waiting for them on the pavement and headed toward Sam when she pulled up. Justin had gone on to the den ahead of them, intent on warning the pack members of their mate's arrival and also to make sure the spare room was ready for her. He watched as Sam scooted across the seat to let Chet take the wheel, put the car into reverse and headed home. Samantha looked at Chet's profile as he drove her junk heap. She was embarrassed about the state of her car, but there was nothing she could do about it. All her money had gone into paying the bills and keeping a roof over her and Peter's heads, and then after she had left her home she'd had to work from hand to mouth. Sighing, she turned away from Chet to stare out the side window. She was so tired of being alone and working just to survive. It would be so nice to have a cushion of money she could use for a rainy day, but she didn't see that happening anytime soon. Pulling her optimistic personality to the fore, she thought about how thankful she should be to have landed a job so quickly when she needed it. She was also on her way to the Three Domain brothers' home. The first thing she was going to do was find out how much they were going to charge her for leasing a room with them, and then she intended to bathe and crawl into bed. It had been so long since she'd had a decent meal and a good night's sleep. You need new brake pads, darling. I can feel and hear metal grinding when I push on the pedal and the steering's pulling to the left, Chet said. What I really need is a new car, Sam replied with a weary sigh. Well, don't worry about it now, Sam. Maybe I can have a look at your car for you, Chet suggested. Oh really? I would appreciate it if you could. I know my car isn't safe. You bet I will, darling. But since you'll be living and working with us, I think it would be wise if you got a lift into the club with one of us. Roan and I have the most shifts, and Justin just fills in occasionally. What else does Justin do? She asked curiously. Oh, he helps our cousins Chris, Blake, and James with the security business. Blake is a doctor and doesn't really have much time to deal with that side of things anymore, so Justin is taking over from him. Oh, well, it must be nice to have a medical practitioner in the family. You have no idea, Chet muttered. Sam didn't think she was supposed to have heard that comment and didn't know what he meant by it, so she remained silent. Just as she was beginning to think her tired, burning eyes were going to close on her, Chet slowed the car and turned onto a driveway, in through great big wrought iron gates. She turned back and watched them close automatically. For a moment she felt trapped and had trouble taking a breath, but she threw off her paranoia and looked back to the front. The house that came into view took her breath away. It was so big and so beautiful. The image of large plantation houses with their white columns flashed through her mind. As gorgeous as it was, she felt as if she should ask Chet to turn her car around and take her back to town. She didn't belong here. These people were obviously wealthy and she didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. How the hell was she supposed to stay here when she couldn't afford anything but chain store clothes, and even then that was sometimes a stretch? Often she'd had to resort to shopping in the second-hand stores. What the hell are you thinking, Sam? You should be demanding that he take you to the club. But she didn't want to be alone anymore. She was sick and tired of being scared and lonely. These 3 men drew her like a magnet to metal, and even though she had no idea why, she was curious enough to find out. Chapter 5. Chet had been watching Sam from the corner of his eye since the moment he had sat in the driver's seat of her car. She had been looking at him for about 15 minutes, her expression going from soft and dreamy to frowning concern. He would have given anything to ask what was going through her pretty head but held off. Justin was pushy enough for all of them and he didn't want her to feel as if she was cornered. Slowing her car, he turned into the drive of the Pack property and through the automatic gates, which thankfully Roan had left open. When Sam turned back, after he drove through the gates and they got to the house, he saw awe pass across her face, then what looked like fear. Parking the vehicle in Roan's designated spot, he got out and went around to Sam. She was still sitting frozen in the passenger seat, so he opened her door to help her out. "Are you all right, darlin'?" he asked as he held his hand out to her. "Yes," Sam replied, but her voice had risen to a higher pitch. "You have nothing to be worried about, Sam. Everyone here will like you. Just relax, darlin'. I'll try." He led her to the door of the massive carport. They stepped into the entry hall, and he guided her toward the kitchen dining room. Everyone was already seated at the long table and food was just being served. Justin got up from his seat and so did Roan. Chet stood behind Sam and placed his hands on her shoulders while his brother stood to either side of her. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Samantha Winters. She'll be staying with us for a while and also working at the club," Justin announced. Chet looked down to see Sam had bowed her head, her eyes toward the floor. Little did she know that her submissive gesture would please his family, but most of all his alphas. The alphas shared responsibility in leading their pack, but if there was ever any conflict with decision-making in Jonah, the lead alpha decided to take control. His word was pack law. Chet was often amazed at the power of his alphas, but especially of Jonah. He could use his voice to command at will and demand acquiescence, as could Mikhail and Brock, but Jonah was the much more formidable of the three. Everyone in the pack had responsibilities and no one took their tasks lightly. There was a chain of command that had to be obeyed, even though all pack members were an integral part of the family and had input into what decisions were made. Roan, Justin, and Chet had planned to be beta since they had reached puberty. Most of the time pack members were born into the levels of hierarchy, but sometimes if a wolf proved he was worthy, he could work his way up the ranks. Chet and his brothers were now one step away from reaching their goal. They only had to prove to the alphas they had the strength needed to keep the pack safe. But how the hell they were going to do that when they hadn't been challenged by the other betas or by anyone else? He had no clue. "Come on, honey, and I'll introduce you around." Justin took hold of Sam's hand. He led her over to Jonah, Mikhail, Brock, and Michelle. Once the introductions were over, Justin seated her next to him, and Roan sat at her other side. Damn, he was going to have to work out a system with Roan about taking turns with the seating arrangements. He knew Justin wouldn't relinquish his seat as he considered himself the most alpha out of the three of them. Angie, their chief cook and housekeeper, and her daughter Cindy greeted Sam, and Michelle, along with Kira and Talia, tried to put her at ease. But he could tell she was uncomfortable. Chet wished he knew what he could do to get her to relax, but nothing came to mind. Taking the chair next to Roan, he began to eat. "How can you still be hungry?" Sam asked Roan quietly. "You just ate dinner at the club. We have fast metabolisms, darlin'. We eat a lot," Chet replied, leaning forward to see her around Roan, giving a smile and a wink. "You should eat something, Sam. You hardly touched your dinner." "Thank you, but I'm just not hungry." With dinner over, he glanced at Sam and saw she was barely able to keep her eyes open, so he stood and walked up behind her. "Do you want to go to your room now, darlin'? You look exhausted," he whispered quietly against her ear. At her nod, he pulled her chair back and helped her to her feet. His poor little darlin' was so tired she barely glanced around as he led her to the third floor, where their rooms were. He showed her to her room and where the bathroom was and left her to bathe while he went to get her bags from her car. His brothers were already in their living room when he returned. Justin was pacing back and forth in agitation and Roan was sprawled out on the sofa, looking relaxed, but he knew better. They were both wound tighter than a clock. Spring. His wolf, hearing water splashing in the bathroom, began chafing at the bit to be set free. Imagining Sam in their tub, gloriously naked, made his dick jerk against the zipper of his jeans. Now he understood what had his brothers all fired up. Hearing a moan and another splash, He ground his teeth and adjusted his throbbing dick. Justin turned to him with a scowl. Get her to hurry the hell up before I go in there, haul her out and jump her bones. Maybe you should go for a run. Chet cursed the low, gravelly tone of his voice as his wolf made its presence known, his control hanging by a thread. Let's go, Justin growled. He and Roan headed toward the door. Chet should have been going with his brothers to release some of the sexual tension they felt at having their mate in their home, but he didn't want to leave her alone for a second. Justin and Roan slammed the door behind them without a backward glance, and he was truly thankful they left when they did, because less than a second later, the door to the bathroom opened. The sweet scent of oranges, peaches, and vanilla drifted to his nostrils along with the aroma of his sexy little mate. He looked up as her head appeared around the corner of the hall. Could you please bring my bags to my room so I can get dressed? Sam asked. Chet wondered if she had anything covering her and, without thinking about his actions, picked up her bags and stalked toward her. Sam's eyes widened and he heard her gasp as she ducked back out of sight. Picking up his pace, he followed her to the bathroom door and dropped her bags to the floor. There she was, standing uncertainly, her face flushed and clean from her bath, wrapped in his robe. Inhaling, he growled when her scent mixed with his assailed his olfactory senses. As if in a dream, he reached out and snagged her around the waist and drew her up against his body. Her waist was so tiny he thought he may be able to wrap her with his arm. She tilted her neck, and he could tell by the angle she would end up hurting her muscles, so he pulled his arm free and grasped her hips in both his hands. He cursed the fact that he could feel her hip bones jutting into his flesh, even through the bulk of his robe. He lifted her until she was on eye level with him and dropped his gaze to her lush lips, hankering for a taste. Placing her hands on his shoulders to steady herself, she licked those cupid bows and glanced up again. What are you doing? She asked breathlessly. Knowing damn well she knew what he wanted, he didn't answer. Instead, he slowly lowered his head until their lips were a scant inch apart. When she didn't protest but lowered her eyes to his lips, he groaned and moved forward until their lips met. Not moving for a brief moment, Chet savored the first contact of her mouth to his, then growling, he brushed his flesh over hers in soft, slow passes so she could become acquainted with his touch. Again, when she didn't protest or pull away, he deepened the kiss. He opened his mouth and licked her lips with his tongue. Her soft moan made his balls ache and his cock throb. Pushing his way into her mouth, he tasted every inch of her sweetness. She wrapped her arms around his neck and her legs around his waist, which only made it harder for him to control his wolf and his raging desire. Her warm, wet pussy was now against his crotch with only the material of his jeans as a barricade, and the heat of her seared his cock. She whimpered into his mouth as he moved his hand from her ribs down under the rope to her ass. Kneading her fleshy globes, he thrust his cock against her wet, fragrant pussy as their mouths stayed connected and their tongues fought for supremacy. The sweet aroma of her desire called to him and his wolf. He had never smelled anything so delectable in his life. Wrapping his tongue around hers, he drew it into his mouth and suckled on her like he imagined her doing to his cock, making his wolf howl. Moving a couple of steps, he planted her back against the wall in the hall and pinned her with his body, easing an arm beneath her ass. He slowly untied the robe, spreading the material aside so he had access to her naked flesh. Growling into her mouth when she withdrew her tongue and, finally, her mouth from his, he rested his forehead against hers and opened his eyes and nearly came in his pants. Her irises were nearly hidden by her largely dilated pupils and were glazed over with lust. Following the pink in her cheeks, he looked down her neck and chest. She was absolutely exquisite. He knew she would be, but his imagination hadn't done her justice. Hard brown and rosy nipples stood out on her breasts, which were creamy white, the delicate blue veins visible under her skin, and her mounds were a delectable handful. Chet moved his hand up and cupped her warm, soft flesh, groaning with delighted arousal as her turgid peak stabbed into the palm of his hand. His mouth salivating for a taste, he kneaded her breast and slowly lowered his head. Her citrusy scent wrapped around him, and he opened his mouth, sucking the hard tip in between his lips, and he knew in that moment that one taste of his mate would never be enough. He let her flesh go, moving his hand away, but kept suckling on her sensitive nub and smoothed his hand down over her belly. She bucked her hips into his and mewed when he thrust his forward. His jeans were becoming damp from the juices leaking out of her cunt, and he needed to feel her slick heat against his fingers. Moving his palm down over her stomach, he caressed his way around her thigh, touching her soft, wet labia with the tips of his fingers. She was so hot and wet, and her scent was calling so strongly to his wolf, he could barely restrain his animal from taking over and claiming her right then and there. Knowing he had to get control, he threw his head back, closed his eyes, and inhaled deeply. His wolf was on the precipice of taking over. He felt claws erupt on the hand under her ass and quickly withdrew his fingers from against her wet pussy. He looked down. Seeing her eyes widen with shock, he knew his eyes had changed to gold. Releasing her, he let her slide down his body, and when she was steady on her feet, he stepped back and turned away as she clutched the gaping robe. "What the hell are you?" she whispered through ragged pants for air. "Sam," he growled. "Go to your room, darlin', and lock the door." Listening intently, he heard the rustle of her robe as she closed it, and then she ran. The door to the bedroom slammed closed, and his wolf senses picked up the slight snick as the lock was engaged. "Roan, Justin, I just fucked up in a big way." He ran for the door to their suite. Pulling his clothes from his body, he ran down the stairs and out into the cool night air. Bones popping and cracking, muscles contorting, he leapt from the front steps with 2 legs and landed agilely on 4. He ran through the trees, leaped over fallen limbs, and howled. "What did you do?" Justin asked. "I kissed her and nearly lost control of my wolf. My hands began to change, and she saw my eyes. I had to tell her to go to her room and lock the door. Was so fucking close to biting her, claiming her. I had to get out of there." Chet could smell that his brothers were close. Leaping a fallen tree, he came upon them suddenly in a clearing. The moonlight shone on their glossy pelts. Roan's wolf stepped forward, his golden eyes on Chet. "Fuck, Chet. You were the one to tell us to leave, and here you are telling us you nearly claimed her. What the hell? Was she scared?" Roan inquired. Chet licked his muzzle sheepishly. "Yeah, sort of." "What the fuck does that mean?" "She was more nervous than scared, but she did what I told her." Justin began to pace the clearing, aggravated, but Chet continued. "We're going to have to tell her what we are. Sam needs to know the truth about us so she doesn't become frightened and take it into her head to run off. I think we should leave it until morning, unless she comes out of her room again tonight. But after what you just told us, I don't think she will. Let her get a good night's rest, and we'll deal with this first thing. It would be better if one of the other women were around when we tell her. Their presence will help keep her calm while we answer all her questions," Justin explained. "Okay. I'm sorry. If I had realized how hard it would be to control my wolf after I got my first taste of her, I would never have laid a hand on her. I've never felt anything like it before. All I could think about was burying my cock into her wet, creamy pussy and claiming her. Nothing else mattered. Don't think I would have cared if the room had been full of people. My wolf got away from me." Chet looked to each of his brothers. "I don't know how much longer I can be around her and not stake a claim." Justin woofed softly in acknowledgement, but his instructions were stern. "You're gonna have to keep your distance. No touching or kissing unless she makes the first move, but only after she knows what we are. It's not fair to Sam. She should know all the facts before we try to talk her into staying with us and being our mate." Justin leapt lightly atop the fallen tree and looked back at Chet and Roan. Narrowing his eyes on Chet, he ordered, "Don't come back until you've got your wolf under control. The last thing we need is for you to break down her door and claim her without her consent." "I wouldn't do that, Justin." Chet felt his lips lifting, baring his teeth in annoyance. "Fuck, why do you think I told her to go to her room and ran outside?" Justin bounded down the other side of the log. Roan cleared it in a flying leap that sprayed dead leaves behind his back paws, though out of sight. Justin's answer came to Chet loud and clear. "Because I had to do the same thing, and so did Roan, and we haven't even kissed her." Chapter 6. Sam leaned back against the door and groaned quietly. What the hell had she been doing? The image of Chet looking at her breast just before he sucked a nipple into his mouth heated her face with unparalleled desire. She couldn't believe she had let the man kiss her and nearly fuck her up against a wall. For God's sake. When she had looked up into his eyes, they had been a glowing gold color. The sight had awed her and also made her more than a little nervous. She'd never seen anything like it before. When he had growled at her to lock herself in her room, she had been too dumbfounded to question him. Easing away from the door, she moved to the bed, removed the robe, and slid between the sheets. It was going to be a long night. Just as her head settled on the pillow, she flinched at the sound of a wolf howling into the night. That sound made her heart clench. It was so full of sadness and loneliness. She wanted to get dressed, go outside, and comfort the animal. Get a grip, Sam. The only thing you would get, if you could even find the wolf, is dead. He would eat you for his dinner. Pushing her whimsical thoughts aside, she sighed and closed her eyes. She hoped the man who had been watching her from the car hadn't been Gerard Long. It was probably just a coincidence, but she'd been too nervous to take any chances. Maybe he had lost her trail or finally come to realize that she really wasn't interested in him. That man scared her more than Peter had, and that was saying something. Sadness engulfed her as she thought of the child she had lost. Even though she had only carried her baby for 2 months, grief would still rear its ugly head and swamp her from time to time. She'd hardly had any time over the last 6 months to think of her loss, but being around the 3 Domain brothers made her dream the impossible. Her thoughts were so convoluted she didn't know where her own mind was. She pictured herself cradling a baby against her chest while she fed it, and the 3 sexy brothers watched her. The image was so real in her mind that she could smell their unique scents and nearly feel the weight of her child against her skin. Tightness took hold of her chest, and tears tracked down her cheeks. Pain racked her as she thought of the baby she had lost and would never be able to hold, love, or nurture. She hadn't even known whether her fetus was a boy or a girl. Pushing a fist against her mouth to stifle her sobs, she cried for her loss. The loss of never being able to hold her baby in her arms, or to smell the sweet scent of her child, or to have the opportunity to guide him or her into adulthood. She would never know the joy of looking into her baby's face, seeing it smile at her with the unconditional love only a child could give. Burying her face into her pillow, she sobbed, great racking sounds of grief. She'd really only cried once, and that was the day she had lost her beloved child. Trying to keep a roof over her head, and then holding off Peter's friends and colleagues had taken all her concentration. But for some reason, being with these men brought it all to the forefront of her mind, and she couldn't hold her emotions in another moment. She cried and cried and cried, oblivious to her surroundings. She heard a faint click but was too caught up in her own grief to take much notice. Warmth penetrated her skin as hands lifted her and then surrounded her. She was pulled into comforting arms. When the tears finally slowed and the pain receded slightly, she became aware of the fact that she was totally naked in the arms of the 3 Domain brothers. She hid her face against Justin's chest, knowing how ravaged she looked after such a crying jag, but sighed with contentment at being surrounded by all 3 men. She was sitting sideways on Justin's lap with Roan at her back and Chet close to her front. Chet was looking at her with such worried concern as he rubbed a hand up and down her arm in soothing strokes. Roan was rubbing her back while Justin was stroking her hair. Sure, it's okay, little one, everything will be all right, Justin murmured. Sam was only spasmodically hiccuping now, but was thankful for the reassurance these 3 men offered her. Roan reached out and took her chin gently into his hand, tilting her head up and away from her protective haven. Do you want to talk about it, sweetness? And minus not yet, Sam replied in a voice husky with tears. Why don't we all go to the kitchen and get a drink? Suggested Justin. Oh, mine is okay. Here, let me help you with your robe, darling. Chet began to put it around her body with Roan and Justin's help. It's your robe. She inhaled his masculine scent. Yeah, but it looks so much better on you, darling. She looked up to see him smiling down at her. When she was covered with the sleeves rolled back so she could see her hands, Sam smiled at the 3 men. She was about to follow Roan to the door, but Justin scooped her up into his arms and carried her. I can walk, you know. I know you can, honey, but I love the way you feel in my arms. Justin smiled down at her. What do you want to drink, darling? Chet asked as Justin sat down at the kitchen table with Sam seated across his thighs. Tea, please. Lean back and relax, Sam. Justin helped her get comfortable so he could support her back with his arm and shoulder. Roan sat down across from her, and, when Chet had finished making the drinks, coffee for them and tea for her, he sat on the chair next to them. They sat in companionable silence until she had drunk half her tea, and then Justin spoke. "Talk to us, honey. Tell us why you are so sad." Sam couldn't keep quiet anymore. She needed to purge what she had kept bottled up inside so it wouldn't destroy her, so she began talking. "I married young at the tender age of 18, and had planned to go to culinary school, but that never happened. My husband didn't want to waste money on me, so I put my plans on the back burner. Peter Strom, my husband, had opened his own insurance business, and we needed money to live until he was established, so I worked at whatever I could to pay the rent. I was so in love with him, or thought I was, that I would have done anything to support him. We were happy for the first 12 months, or seemed to be, and he worked hard trying to make a success of his business. Then he began to turn spiteful." Sam paused and finished off her tea. She looked to Roan and Chet, and they looked at her encouragingly. "Go on, honey," Justin said, and stroked her hair. "He never had anything nice to say to or about me, and since he was 6 years older than I thought I was somehow lacking. He started picking on the way I dressed, the way I wore my hair, and the curves of my body. He used to tell me I was ugly and my boobs were too big. Little by little he chipped away at my self-esteem until I had nothing left inside but emptiness and bitterness toward the man who was supposed to love me. Peter started coming home late every night, and when I questioned him he became so furious with me I backed off and tried to soothe him instead. In the end I was glad he didn't come home until the early hours of the morning, because I had become so afraid of his mood swings and temper that I was scared he would take it out on me." She took a deep breath and fidgeted with her mug. "Do you want another tea, darlin'?" Roan asked. "Please." She handed over her empty mug and clutched her now empty hands. Following Roan with her eyes, she continued. "When he was home he would criticize everything about me, even what I cooked him for dinner. Peter's business failed. He found another job with a large insurance company, and I thought he would be happier without the worry of the business hanging over his head. What a joke. Even though he had a job, he stopped contributing to the running of the household, and I had to take on a second job just to make ends meet. One day 6 months ago he arrived home before me. I was 2 months pregnant, but I still had worked for 8 hours at the local supermarket ringing up groceries and then worked another 6 hours in a bar serving drinks. My feet and back were aching, and I was so tired I could barely keep her eyes open. Knew as soon as I opened the door that Peter was home. Feeling the thick tension in the air, I headed straight for the kitchen, trying to avoid him. Just as I finished my glass of water, I knew he was there, standing behind me. The hair at my nape stood on end. Sam paused, reached out for the mug of fresh tea Roan handed her, and sipped. "Thanks," she said, and took a deep breath. Her body was tense, and each of the men with her offered her comfort in some small way. Justin was still stroking her hair, and Roan reached for her free hand and enveloped it in his, while Chet sat close and rubbed her shoulder. He grabbed me by the hair and dragged me into our bedroom, causing me to cry out with pain and fear. Pushing at him to get him to release me was utterly futile and only further exacerbated his rage. He cursed me and threw me at the bed, and when I tried to scramble away from him, he pinned me in place. Then the accusations began. He accused me of having an affair, of running around behind his back, spreading my legs for every male in the city. If the notion hadn't been so ludicrous, I would have laughed. When was I supposed to have found the time or energy to go cavorting around with other men when I worked 2 jobs? And I realized after a moment I had actually asked that question out loud. Peter didn't reply. Instead he started hitting me. He cursed me for holding him back and told me he hated my guts. He was smart about his abuse. He didn't hit my face where any of the bruises could be seen. It didn't matter anyway, because I didn't leave our home for 3 days. After punching me in the stomach and chest, he packed up his belongings and then left the apartment, without a backward glance or care for my condition. Her breath hitched on a sob, and she closed her eyes for a moment to regain control. "We're with you, honey. You're all right now," Justin said quietly and rubbed her back. It took me 30 minutes to make my way into the bathroom, and I stood under the warm water in the shower, crying my eyes out as I lost my newly formed baby. I collapsed to the floor with such agony and grief. How long I spent sitting on the floor of the shower I have no idea. I only remember the cold water finally penetrating my pain-filled heart and body, and I literally crawled from the cubicle. I existed in a catatonic state of grief and pain for days on end, but I finally came to terms with my loss, pulled myself together, and began to live again. Roan moved from his chair and began to pace the kitchen. She couldn't see his eyes as his head was lowered, but she could see the muscle in his jaw ticking, and his fists were clenched. Chet's body had hardened with tension, and he was gripping the edge of the table with his fingers so hard that his knuckles were white. She wasn't prepared to look at Justin but wondered why they were so angry. She was the one who had been abused and lost her baby, not them. I know I should have gone to seek medical help, but I was so humiliated at what my husband did to me. I didn't see anyone. Took me 3 days to be able to move without hunching over, and by that time I had lost both my jobs. I eventually sought out medical attention and was told I was lucky that my reproductive organs hadn't been affected by the attack. Of course I told my doctor I had been mugged, since I didn't want to see sympathy or pity in those kind eyes. Peter sent me divorce papers and our divorce was finalized in quick succession. What I didn't realize was that my husband had spread the word amongst his seedy work colleagues at the large insurance company he worked for, saying that I would spread my legs for anyone. I found another job and was working in a small cafe, barely earning enough to pay the rent, and the door knocking started. I was so scared to find strange men standing outside my apartment door leering at me until I slammed the door closed in their faces. After questioning one man about why he was at my door, he apologized for harassing me and he told me what Peter had done. Most of the men must have received the message because in the end I just didn't bother to answer the door at all. But there was one man who kept persisting, and I was scared by the cold, evil look in his eyes. He introduced himself as Gerard Long, and every week after that, without fail, he would pound on my door until I called the police on him. Things were quiet for a while, but then he started up again. Only this time he somehow managed to get a hold of my phone number and used to whisper all the nasty things he wanted to do to me through the phone. He was such a sick individual, and he scared me so much that I packed up my stuff, ended the lease on the apartment, and left town. I worked from town to town, state to state, until I arrived in Aztec, she stated emotionlessly and took a deep breath. Now that she was finally finished, she was totally exhausted and emotionally drained. Her eyelids were too heavy to keep open, and she snuggled into Justin and gave up the fight. Fuck. Our little mate has been to hell and back, Justin said quietly, careful not to wake his precious bundle. He rubbed his cheek over the top of her head and inhaled her exquisite citrus peach scent. If I ever get my hands on her ex, I'm going to rip him apart, Roan said in a deep growl. I can't believe why. Fuck, Chet exclaimed in anger. I don't know, but we have to protect her. One of us is to be with her at all times, Justin commanded. I don't care how much she argues she isn't to be left alone. Do you think the guy who was watching her at the motel is the one who's stalking her? We won't know for sure until we run a check on Gerard, which we'll do first thing in the morning. For now I think we should get out Maiden to bed. She needs to rest. She's so tired she has dark smudges under her eyes. You're right. Let's take her to my room. At least with her cuddled up between us we'll know if she has nightmares or doesn't sleep through the night. Besides, I want her next to me, Justin explained as he rose to his feet and carried her to his room, careful not to jostle Sam too much and wake her. He gently placed her in the middle of his large bed, and his brothers helped him get the robe off her, and then he slid in beside her. Roan got in on her other side, and Chet lay across the bottom of the mattress. Tomorrow night I get to sleep where you are, Roan, Chet said firmly. Only if Sam doesn't put up a fuss over sleeping with us, Roan replied quietly. I won't, Sam whispered and rolled over into Justin's embrace. I feel safe here. Justin smiled and looked down at Sam. She had her head resting on his shoulder, and her arm over his chest. As she slid back into sleep, her breathing deepened and evened out once more. Roan moved up close to her back until he was spooning her. Chet was probably touching one of her legs or feet. It was a wolf trait to want to be touching the people they loved, especially their mate. She was such a tiny little thing compared to him and his brothers, but she felt so right being here in his arms. She trusted them. That was a good start. He just hoped after they told her what they were she would still feel the same way about them. Sam was fighting against waking. She was so warm and content she didn't want to surface to face another day. Shifting her legs, she froze when they connected with hard bodies. Sighing, she remembered Justin had placed her into his bed and Roan and Chet had got in as well. No wonder she was so hot. She was surrounded by 3 tall, muscular, handsome men. She didn't want to wake up because reality would then intrude and she would have to get up. Today was her first day to start work at the Aztec Club, and even though she looked forward to earning money and being financially independent again, she was too comfortable to want to move. "Morning, honey." Justin's deep cadence broke the silence. "How are you feeling?" Sam lifted her head and squinted through sleep-heavy lids, her gaze connecting with his. "I'm good." "Glad to hear it, sweetness. Do you want some coffee?" Roan asked from behind her and nuzzled her neck. "That would be nice. Why don't you go take a shower, darlin'? And by the time you're done the coffee should be ready," Chet suggested. Sounds good. What do you usually have for breakfast, honey?" "Just coffee." "Well, that's going to change starting now," Justin stated firmly. "You need to start your day off right, honey. Come on up and at daylight's burning." "Okay," Sam replied and shivered when the covers were pulled away from her body. "Shit. I'm naked. When did that happen?" Then she remembered her crying Jag and telling these 3 men about how she had ended up in Aztec. She had fallen asleep on Justin, and he had carried her to his bed. He must have removed her robe so she would sleep more comfortably. "God, you're sexy, darlin'," Chet said in a deep, gravelly voice. Thanks." She felt her cheeks heat. "You don't need to be embarrassed, sweetheart. Your little body is beautiful and perfect," Roan rasped. "Go on, honey. Go and get your shower," Justin suggested and helped her up. Sam snatched the robe from the floor and quickly covered her body suddenly. Feeling very shy, she didn't care that her hands were hidden in the folds of material as she left for the bathroom. What worried her the most was that she could smell her own arousal. God, she hoped they couldn't sense how much she wanted them.